Welcome to the C Word, the Conservators podcast. Today we're talking about new museums.
I'm Kloe Rumsey, an objects conservator based in Manchester, in England.
My name is Phedra Komodromou. I am a conservator of antiquities based in Nicosia, Cyprus.
Hi, everyone. So
Hello.
Today we've got a very exciting guest host with us to help us talk about the topic. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi everyone, my name's Jill Carruthers. I'm the exhibitions manager at Showtown in Blackpool, which is in the north of the UK.
Yay! So I'm really excited in this episode because every one of the hosts on this episode is a belly dancer.
Oh my.
I know. So I met Jill via dancing. We danced together and it just came out in conversation, as it does if you're a museum person, that we both worked in museums. So I've had in the back of my mind for years now, oh, Jill's working on something really cool and I don't know what's going on with it, but I'd like to talk to her about it. And this is our chance.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We tend to like to start with a bit of a definition. So what are we talking about when we're saying new museums?
Yes, I would like to know, actually, what defines a new museum? How long does it need to be open for it to be considered new? Is a 10-year-old museum still a new museum? Does it depend on how many visits it has had?
At one point, my museum was new in 1995. And looking through some of the ideas that I'd had, we've got 2002 new museum opened. We've got Jill's museum, which opened 2 months ago. So at the moment, we're talking about the museums that are opened from either an existing collection or a new collection that's built specifically for the museum. I'm interested in why they start, what the goal is, who thought of them, who came up with the idea, and, well, the outcome as well.
It's a good question though about like what constitutes a new museum. I was talking to my husband about it this morning when we were out for a dog walk, and it's so subjective, really. I think for me, I still consider the V&A Dundee a new museum, and you think to yourself, well, maybe the people of Dundee, because I met my husband when we were working together in an arts organisation in Derby, and that opened freshly in like 2008, but like almost as soon as because you're like embroiled in something, you live somewhere, you work somewhere, it almost becomes quite old hat quite quickly if you're a local. But obviously to like somebody who lives outside of Dundee or lives outside of Derby, maybe it's like, oh no, that's the new visitor attraction, the new museum, for a lot longer for them than it would be for a local.
I'd say that's the sign of something being really successful if people sort of start assuming it's been there forever as soon as it opens.
There was a need there and it filled it. So
exactly, yes. So V&A Dundee, we opened in 2018. And I was thinking IWM North, surely that's a new one as well. Opened in 2002.
I don't consider that a new museum.
No.
2002, that was 22 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, God, don't.
I'm not that much older myself.
All right, Phedra. God.
Yeah, no, I mean, IWM North has been for almost as long as I've been in the cultural and heritage sector. I don't consider that a new museum.
I'm interested in the IWM and the Science Museum Group ones because they have multiple sites. The little blurb on Google says that IWM North started to bring the IWM collections to the north, so presumably they didn't use an existing museum in the north, whereas the Science Museum Group took over some of the museums that were struggling in roughly 2008. But I think they were all existing museums, collections that were adopted by the Science Museum Group. Whereas I think V&A Dundee was opened especially.
Yes, yeah, it was. Well, so it was obviously based on the V&A's collections, Scottish design collections, and there was a hole there, a need. Design museum in Scotland celebrating Scottish design.
Do we know about the funding for that?
That was it's now called National Lottery Heritage Fund, but it was a HLF project at the time. I think there was probably many other funders in the mix.
Another that I looked at was the Faith Museum in Bishop Auckland as a sort of mini case study. And I knew about that one before because in 2017, my museum was aware of the project. It's called the Auckland Project. Before I looked into this, I'd just heard of it through my various managers and conversations around the acquisitions table, talking about this new project to open a museum of faith. And looking into it now more recently, it was a larger sort of town-wide regeneration project described as regenerating a declining town to be a sort of cultural hub. I've not been. I'd really like to go. It opened in 2023 and funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the Jerusalem Trust and the Kirby Lang Foundation. When we were discussing it around the acquisitions table, we were talking about the building of a collection from the ground up, essentially. So I believe when we were talking about it, it was going to be partially loan, but the exhibition opening was going to be partially loan based, but also as part of building their own collection with their own objects. What I don't know is whether they started off with some objects because of the heavily religious connection of the area, whether they started off with a collection of stuff or whether they just built it from, absolutely nothing.
I tried to find museums worldwide that opened in 2024, actually, and there are plenty. Within Europe, there's the Forma Urbis Museum and Archaeological Park del Celio in Rome, Italy. So it's an archaeological park which also features the fragments of the ancient Forma Urbis Romae marble map. In London, if we go back to the UK, there's a Museum of Homelessness as well, and we will get to know more about that later on in the episode. Within America, there is the Gene and Rick Elderman Fossil Park Museum in New Jersey that opened in April 2024. And it says it's built on an active research site and will offer immersive display and fossil hunts featuring 66 million year old fossils from the Cretaceous period. So that sounds cool. Exciting.
Yeah.
Within Africa, there's the Museum of West African Arts in Nigeria, located in Benin City, and of course the Grand Egyptian Museum, which I am dying to go visit myself. In Asia, we have the Paleozoological Museum of China in Hebei province, and the Nintendo Museum in Kyoto, Japan.
The Nintendo Museum?
I know,
That's
sounds
amazing.
So exciting.
I was in Kyoto about a month ago. I'm trying to remember if we went. We did a lot of Pokemon and Nintendo themed things. I don't think we did go. And I think Aaron, my husband, is going to be very upset.
Oh, no. Well, it's a reason to go back, I guess.
Absolutely.
It says it's in a old Nintendo factory.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And it has old consoles and games and various historical items from the brand as well.
That's really cool.
So in Australia, there was the Sydney Modern Project Art Gallery of New South Wales. Although this may have been an expansion project, I'm not quite sure if it opened in 2022 and then a new wing opened this year. And then, of course, Qatar and UAE have been opening new museums for the past 5 years. They're really upping their museum game over there.
Oh, wow. What other museums of?
So in Qatar, you have the National Museum of Qatar in Doha, the Qatar Auto Museum, also in Doha, and the Art Mill Museum, again in Doha. In UAE, you have the Al Shindaga Museum in Dubai. Sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong. The Guggenheim of Abu Dhabi, Zayed National Museum, also in Abu Dhabi, and the Team Lab Phenomena Abu Dhabi. This one is interesting. It's an innovative museum by Team Lab, which will focus on environmental phenomena. The exhibits will evolve and respond to their environments, offering visitors a unique and changing experience with each visit.
Yeah, so that's Team Lab was established in Tokyo, and we went to the original. It's called Borderless. It's an attraction rather than a museum. There's no objects per se. Everything is projections, immersive spaces, music, sound, smells, all sorts of stuff. Like everything's sort of very experiential, but it does respond to the people in the space. So if you sit down for long enough, flowers will grow around you. Or if you stand still long enough against a wall, a waterfall will start to part itself around you.
Wow.
Things like that. And you can interact with the birds and they turn into butterflies and all sorts of stuff like that. Oh, apparently the Nintendo Museum is not open yet. My husband has just texted me. That's why we didn't go.
Oh, well, at least you didn't miss out.
Yeah, definitely going to have to go there next time.
It's true that a lot of web pages that talk about the opening of a museum may not be updated. I think it was the case for a while with the Grand Egyptian Museum as well, which kept saying it will open on such dates, and then we were all waiting in agony. I believe that the wings are not open, but the central area is open. So I watched a video recently. I will link it in the show notes. It was some influencer in Egypt that posted it. So they have like a trial run. You can buy tickets and you go to the ground floor, and then there's a central staircase that has a bunch of statues that you can go up and down. And from that staircase, you're supposed to enter the wings. I think the wings are not open just yet, but you can just go up and down the staircase and look at the statues that are there. And it looks like there is a lot of emphasis on accessibility. So there is an escalator as well as an elevator that goes diagonally. So access with wheelchair to go and see those statues on the staircase as well.
Brilliant.
That's really cool. So a soft opening, I guess.
Yes.
A bit. It's a bit open. When I was in Cairo last year, I heard that it wasn't open yet because of a need to complete the infrastructure around the museum. So like the metro and the roads and stuff. This is entirely here, not even general hearsay. This is just what somebody told me once. But that might be one of the reasons that it's partially open.
I mean, that does make sense. A museum that's not easily accessible will not have many visitors.
I feel like this is a really good time to ask Jill her story. I have lots of questions. I want to know how you joined the team, how the project started, who thought it was a great idea, where the money came from, where the collection came from, all sorts of things.
Tell us everything.
Tell us everything.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna rewind all the way back to 2013.
2013, nice.
2013, before I joined the project. That's when the project really got going. A lady called Heather Morrow was working as the head of heritage for Blackpool Council, and she and her colleague Polly Hamilton submitted a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund for a feasibility study for putting a museum, because Blackpool doesn't have a museum at this point in time, not public anyway, for about 1.2 million, for putting a museum in a very old, disused or rarely used theatres in the Winter Gardens, which is a huge visitor attraction in Blackpool. It's got loads of different theatres within it, loads of different auditorium spaces that are used for conferences, things like that. But this particular theatre, the Pavilion Theatre, which is the oldest theatre in the complex, was very rarely used because of its poor state of repair, basically. Obviously, it was kind of a win-win. It was going to renovate this beautiful 1878 theatre to its former glory, but also create a museum for Blackpool. So I joined the project in 2015 and really sort of got my feet under the table quite quickly, got to know about Blackpool's history and learned all about the Blackpool Council collections. So yes, there was an established collection already. So basically the Blackpool Council acquired the Winter Gardens and the Tower in 2011, I believe. Might have the date wrong on that, sorry if I do. And with that, they acquired the archives for the two venues and all of basically the Tower Tower Company archive is vast because the Tower Company back in the day owned pretty much all of the major theatres and entertainment venues in Blackpool. It's basically an amazing working archive of this organisation that ran loads of the entertainment venues around Blackpool. So we as a team quickly had to sort of establish where we were, who we were working with, what we were working with, what the space was all about, and what stories would be featured in the museum. As a team, we did a vast amount of public consultation because obviously it was very important that we reflected stories that the public and Blackpool people wanted to see in this museum. It quickly became apparent that we weren't going to fit them all in, all these stories that everybody wanted in. We had about 120 possible stories and themes that we could celebrate in the museum. And obviously there was parameters, things like, well, do we have any objects in the collection that can actually help us put a display together for that particular topic? Is it going to appeal to our audiences, that topic? Or is it just, could it be a sub-theme of another topic? So we whittled those stories down to 12. They were 12 themes with lots of stories within them, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we worked really hard and put in our second round funding bid to the HLF. We were also funded by Blackpool Council because this was a Blackpool Council project. We had a bit of a bumpy road. It became apparent quite quickly that this building was not going to be suitable for housing a museum. It had a glass roof to start with, which leaked terribly. The roof of the actual theatre had extensive damage and needed serious renovation and a lot more money than the council or the HLF were willing to stump up. So they put a pause on that project in 2017. So after having worked so hard on something, to have it completely pulled from underneath you was heart-wrenching. We had obviously engaged all these community groups. We'd worked with all these local people. We'd established these amazing stories we wanted to tell, only to have the whole thing just stop. But luckily for us, the council said to us, look, we're really passionate about still having a museum in Blackpool, and we are 100% behind it. What we need you to do is find another venue. So we set about starting our feasibility study again. We found a venue. It ticked a lot of boxes. It was on the promenade, much better in terms of footfall. And it was a black box on this first floor of a 6-story building. So there wasn't the same issues with light and water ingress and things like that. So we started to develop that. We got our second round grant in 2019. We had a bit of a rethink about who we were aiming this museum towards. So we had market research done. We employed a company called Morris Hargreaves McIntyre. They work under the proviso that all audience and visitors can be separated into cultural segments. Each of us fits in one of these cultural segments in some way by our own hobbies, our likes, dislikes. And actually, if you go on the Morris Hargreaves McIntyre website, there's a little 5-question quiz you can do, which you should probably put in the show notes.
Oh my God, yes.
And you can see which segment you fit into. So after doing that, we discovered that our main audience group was an audience group called entertainment. Now, the number one thing this group does is they don't go to museums.
Oh no.
So we had a bit of a challenge on our hands to frame the museum not as a museum.
I see.
And that's what Showtown has ended up becoming. We didn't use the word museum in the name because we knew it would put people off. Mm-hmm. And we had to really think about how we were going to engage visitors who were families, multi-generational families, coming for a really fun and engaging half a day or a day out that they could share all together. That's where Showtown basically was born. We then stripped it back even further and ended up with 6 themes, which is what we've got now after having done that work. And the process of doing that made us much stronger. It made our offer really clear, I think. Having been on that journey and seen what we were to what we are now, I think we're much stronger because of it. That's only 2019. Obviously, then COVID hit, didn't it?
Of course it did. Yeah. What happened? What happened then?
Well, so 2019 was when we appointed our project manager, Susan Ashworth. Almost immediately afterwards, we went into lockdown.
Of course.
I think she started with us January 2020.
Nice.
And yeah, it was straight into lockdown. So at that point, we were at the sort of first fix base build. I think it was like Reba 4. I don't know if you know your Reba stages, but
no.
It's all to do with the architectural sort of process. So like Reba 1's from concept through to completion, and Reba 4's the bit in the middle where you've got these amazing drawings in front of you, and it's that point of then making that into a reality and making all of the other elements fit in. So the mechanical, the electrical, the utilities, everything like that, fitting into place and making sure that the building is going to work in the way that we need it to. But trying to scrutinize these drawings that we had to try and sign off about, like where a plug socket was going to go, or whether, the door architrave was the right size. And, you're working on a tablet that's like this big. Oh, my God. It was really hard work. But obviously, as lockdown eased and things sort of got back into the swing of things, and people were able to start work on site, but were they called bubbles?
Yeah, I think so. It feels like a dream now, doesn't it?
Obviously, therefore, the pace of that was really slow, and slowed us way down. Trying to get materials from various places, from sometimes all over the world, trying to get those sourced was nigh impossible, and ground us to a halt at various points. But we didn't stop working, thankfully, throughout COVID. We had so much to do, as is the way with a massive project. You've never got enough time to get stuff done, and you're always sprinting towards the end anyway.
So how has the engagement been so far?
Fabulous. Yeah, really good. I mean, we're settling into things now. We're starting to work out how things are working when there's a peak time, when there's peak days. We're also doing things like running school sessions. So we've got groups of school kids coming in. There's an evening talk tomorrow. So we're doing sort of engagement activities throughout as well to encourage repeat visitation and try and tap into new audiences. But families love it. Our business model is that if you pay council tax to Blackpool Council, you are classed as a local resident, and if you can prove your address, you can get into the museum for free.
Nice.
And we also have gift aid. So if somebody does pay for a ticket, which is £15 for an adult, they get and they gift it, they get an annual pass, so they can come back as many times as they want throughout the year. One of the things that we wanted to try and overcome when we were doing a lot of our consultation and market research was that local Blackpool people don't see Blackpool as somewhere that's for them. They see it as for visitors only.
Interesting.
And we really wanted to try and combat that and get them through the door and make them feel that this museum was for them as much as it is for visitors to Blackpool. That was the first hurdle, really, and obviously making sure that their free entry is a big part of that.
Is it what you hoped it would be?
Well, yeah, it's amazing. It's weird that it's open and it's like not there all the time. We've just had an influx of like loads of new team members that obviously joined us in like January, and they're all what's called the cast and crew. So we've got like actor interpreters who are characters that you meet in the museum, and the crew are the kind of the visitor services, front of house staff, they all joined us in January. So there was an influx of loads of new people, having gone from a core team of about 10 to 13 of us. We're now up to like 35 something or other,
wow.
I think, that was a shock for me, having been on the project for such a long time. To welcome all these new people, it was amazing. And for it to now be open to the public, and for me to not be there going, is everything okay? Do I need to fix something? How's the collection? Is the air temperature okay? What's going on? It's like it's constantly in my head, like I just need to switch off. It's weird.
Do you find yourself going into the exhibits just to check up on people and on the collection often?
Yeah, I do, and that's I need to stop.
Well, as someone who never heard of Blackpool until about an hour and a half ago, you definitely sold me the place.
Great. Please come and visit.
So I have even more follow-up questions, this time from the sort of conservation side. So when you were starting to work with the collection, yourself and your team were thinking about display cases and what would be in the different display cases and how they would work with the story. When working with the collections themselves and the objects themselves, were you working with conservation, and how much sort of support did you have with that?
One thing that we became quickly aware of after assessing the council's collections was that everything was 2D. So we had a bit of a job on our hands to start an object collection. So this kind of harks back to what we were talking about at the start, really, about actively collecting to fill a gap. I did a lot of work and have been very successful in a fabulous relationship with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. They have a fabulous theatre and performance department, and their collection is vast. So we've been really lucky in that we were able to take 27 loans on long-term loan from the V&A.
That's fantastic.
And they supported us with the conservation and the mounting and the curation of those displays. We also went out and found private individuals, private organisations that have collections. So the British Music Hall Society was one. Again, they've got an amazing collection, but there is absolutely no outlet for it to be seen. It's all in storage, and quite a lot of it needed a lot of conservation to be done to it. So we needed the help of a textile conservator. So I'm going to name drop here, because why not? Poppy Singer was our first textile conservator who came to support us on the project.
Hi, Poppy.
Hi, Poppy. Yeah, amazing. She did a fabulous job. She did some work on some of the British Music Hall Society items and some of our own collection. And then we needed help then with further conservation and mounting. We needed support with mounting. So we put a brief out for somebody to support with that, and we appointed a lady called Kate Stockwell, and
Hi Kate.
Another name drop. She worked with us for about 2 years in total, all the way through to the final mounting, and she was with us during install. So yes, I physically did her with me at that point, because we had no expertise in textile conservation or really sort of textile mounting or handling, particularly in the exhibitions team.
And this is costume,
yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
All stage costume. So you can imagine it's seen better days. Some of it's had quick fixes. There was duct tape on the bottom of a Danny LaRue costume.
Beautiful.
If you're about to go back on stage, you got to think of something fast, right?
Uh-huh.
It's part of the object story.
Of course.
Amazing tears and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. Fabulous. But
as three belly dancers here tonight, we know what boob tape does to our costumes and how important it is.
Yeah, exactly. Tit tape, glue, staples. What else?
We use everything.
Safety pins.
Safety pins. Oh, the safety pins.
Safety pin. We had object conservation support from Lancashire Conservation Studios in Preston.
Shout out.
So Jenny Truran. Woohoo!
Hi, Jenny.
She supported us amazingly on the objects in our collection. We had painting conservator Philip. Woohoo! Hi, Philip.
Hi, Philip.
And then paper. We had a lot of paper conservation. James Caverhill was our paper conservator. Yoo-hoo!
Hi, James.
Yeah. So many. So yeah, there was lots and lots of support from different fields, and they were all, for the most part, freelancers. Jenny was the only one who wasn't. Oh, and Philip. They were both working for Lancashire Conservation Studios at the time. So it took a grand total of 2 weeks to get the 3D objects, costumes, etc. in. I'd already hung all the 2D framed works before Christmas. So the install period was from the 8th to the 20-something of January. For the most part, it went smoothly. There was a couple of things that didn't quite work. We had to change some mannequin heads, and one mount didn't quite fit properly. So the mount maker, I need to shout out to the mount maker. That was an interesting process as well. So we worked with Colin John Lindley and his partner Kate. They've made all of the mounts in the museum bespoke for display. So
nice. That's
they
so
were just
cool.
So fabulous and easy to work with. They were really, really great and supported us through that process as well, which was really fun.
I was going to ask about delays. Your setup seems to have gone quite quickly. Were you expecting it to go that quickly? Was it the plan? Did it go less quickly than you thought?
Well, so originally we were going to do object install in October of 2023, and that got pushed on because there was a delay to the exhibition fit out contractor's work. There was a lot of different elements. So there was a hardware fit out contractor, an exhibition fit out contractor, an interactives contractor. So there was lots of different elements to, the exhibition design and fabrication. And if one of them got delayed, then obviously there was a bit of a delay to everybody. So we pushed the object install to early 24 to give Beck, who were our fit out exhibition fit out contractors, more time to finish their scope of works by Christmas. Yeah. In terms of how long the install took, it actually went a lot quicker than I thought it was going to. When we sort of estimated and put together a plan, and it was like, right, we've got to get this done in 2 weeks. I was initially like, oh my God, there's no way we're going to get it done in 2 weeks, especially with coordination, because obviously the V&A courier their loans. So we had the senior curator of the theatre and performance department, Simon Sladen. He came up and helped install all of the V&A objects. We had a science museum group loan. So there's a lot of sort of lenders that needed factoring into that programme as well, and making sure that they arrived at the right time and there wasn't any hiccups there. So, but no, we didn't have any problems, thankfully. Went really, really well.
Beautiful.
Congratulations. That's so amazing. And it's going well. Reception is good. That's fantastic.
It is.
Well done.
So the current museum I work in is under construction. Well, no, the museum I am preparing the collection for is under construction. Mm-hmm. I'm currently working in the older museum, which was built in the 1920s by the British when Cyprus was a colony. So the current museum that we have was built by the British. It is very much a neoclassical British building. The collection, it's very much the old British colonial idea of, look at all these pretty things, So in our case now with the new museum, which is a giant expenditure from the government, where they're employing Cypriot archaeologists, Cypriot conservators, and Greek archaeologists and conservators as well. It's a new push into decolonizing, I think, the National Museum of Cyprus by making it our own new Cyprus museum, a Cypriot museum. And I think this is a pretty similar story to the Grand Egyptian Museum as well, if I understand correctly. So modernizing the building, making it their own, and bringing local archaeologists and museologists and conservators into the mix as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think, decolonization is a whole episode topic on its own, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's interesting how this is happening more and more at the moment. Do we know if that's the same sort of story in UAE?
Well, in UAE, they are collaborating with the Louvre and the Guggenheim, so they're putting big names of Western provenance. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure actually what who the architects are, if they are local architects or not. In the case of Cyprus, it was a local architect.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so in a sense, they are using big Western names and bringing them to UAE, but it seems that they're making it their own. And I mean, if you look at the architecture of the museum, they are taking advantage of their environment. So I don't know much about that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I just thought I'd ask a question just in case.
Yeah. They are very impressive. I think basically the UAE is trying to up their culture game and to entice tourists to come to UAE because there's a stigma with the Arab world. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't necessarily want to travel to that part of the world. So they need to make it enticing by bringing big museum names into the country. I think maybe once enough tourists are willing to go into the country and the tourism of the area grows, maybe they will have smaller, more local themed museums of their own in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's interesting what the similarity between your museum or your proto-museum, Phedra, and local ownership that's being built. It feels really similar to that in Showtown, and the focus on the area and the people of the area and the ownership of culture as well. It seems like a sort of move away from, as you say, the look at the pretty foreign things and look at this lovely foreign place that we've visited. Isn't the sand nice? You know, it feels like it's definitely a push towards that, which is nice. Maybe you'll also have a sort of free entry for the local people of Cyprus when your museum opens.
I think it will be free for everyone, actually.
Oh, very nice.
I understand, right?
Fabulous. When's it due to open?
Supposedly 2028.
Okay.
Nice, exciting. You've got some time then.
Also, museums in the Mediterranean, they have local artifacts. So they have, let's say, Cyprus is a very interesting case because Cyprus has been colonized by every single nation in the Mediterranean and beyond over the millennia, the centuries. So within Cyprus, there are so many sites and so many artifacts that were found within Cyprus. So they are Cypriot artifacts, but they come from traders and colonizers that brought that stuff there. So you have a very beautiful continuous history of colonization within the country. And I really hope that the museum will reflect that, decolonizing the museum by showing how much it was colonized throughout the centuries as well. But we should mention actually the new definition of museum that was adopted in the past year, if I remember correctly.
What is that? Is this how people are feeling about museums, or is this the new, fresh, shiny definition of museum that museums have come up with?
Yes, that it would be the second option.
Second one, okay.
Basically, museums are no longer defined as a place to protect the objects and show how shiny objects are, but they're more of a place for the people, for the local people, for the tourists to enjoy themselves, learn from the objects. So there's more of an interactive emphasis now on museums. So a new modern museum should step away from just having display cases all over the place with just a vomit of artifacts, every 2 centimeters.
Oh, I like object vomit.
I mean, those are nice too.
Yeah.
But the inclusion of more interactive exhibits and more audiovisual things and activities.
Light shows of flowers growing at your feet if you stay still too long.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
It's funny you should mention that, actually, because when I was sort of thinking about topics of conversation for today, obviously the sort of definition of museum was one of them, and that has changed quite a bit over the years, hasn't it? I got into a bit of a debate with my husband again this morning while I was walking the dog about what constitutes a museum. So I recently took a community group to go and visit Eureka, which is a family-friendly visitor attraction, discovery site centre. So we went to the new one that opened on the Wirral. not that long ago. It's quite new. It's a new museum. This is the thing. Is it a museum? So I was kind of arguing that no, it doesn't really constitute a museum because it doesn't have a single genuine object in it. The whole thing is built for interactivity, and everything are props, things you play with, feel, push, sensory, experiential, rather than there actually being any genuine artifacts, provenance in there. And we got into a heated debate as to whether which one we agreed with. I mean, Titanic is an interesting example. Titanic's not that old, isn't it, in Belfast? That only has a handful of genuine objects in it. The rest of it. Have you been, either of you?
No, I haven't. I have heard about it. It's based on a historic entity though, isn't it?
It's telling a story.
Yes, exactly.
An event, a historical event that most people know about.
A big ship sunk, loads of people died, it was very sad. In case anyone listening to this hasn't heard of Titanic before.
And Rose let Jack fall into the sea.
And there was plenty of room on the wardrobe.
But yeah, I mean, that is a fabulous experience and a wonderful day out, and has so many interactive elements and fabulous audio-visual projections. There's even a ride that you get in a little carriage, and it goes like through the sort of the shipmaking area, and you're sort of blasted with heat from the coals, and it's a really wonderful experience. But in terms of the genuine objects that are in there, it's very little. There's a few handwritten letters and some medals and things like that. But obviously the rest of it's at the bottom of the ocean for the most part, And then Eureka's like, here's the inside of your nose and all these amazing things your nose does. Let's crawl inside your nose and press some buttons and see what things do. And the kids are just like, wow, this is amazing.
That does sound fun as well, but it doesn't sound like storytelling.
But I do learning there though, right?
You are still learning. That's true.
I do want to advocate though for interactive and storytelling.
Oh yeah,
because
totally.
The attention span of people has reduced significantly, especially now with social media being so prominent in our lives, and 10-second videos being so prominent in our lives. So to expect children to visit a museum that has artifact after artifact and barely any narrative, I think is completely unrealistic. And I don't think they will retain any information whatsoever. So I believe that less objects and more narrative is the future of museums.
It's funny you should mention about sort of less is more with objects. And obviously we at Showtown have a very young visitor in mind with our displays, but we've tried to be as multi-generational as possible. So one of the things that came out of our market research is that Blackpool has an average reading age of 9 to 11. So all of our interpretation had to be really pared back. And we worked with a scriptwriter, a lady called Jane Kirkham, who writes children's books, and she writes scripts for television and stuff and children's television shows. And she worked really hard with us. We gave her basically all of the curatorial content and said, this is the story we need you to make like understandable to a 9 to 11-year-old. Go. And she came back with all sorts of amazing poems, short and snappy, fun facts and things that really are quite engaging. But there's layered content there as well. So on the face of it, even if you just read a couple of lines, you would get the sort of the crux of what we're hoping to communicate through the displays. But there's more content, there's more information there for somebody who's interested and wants to read more or learn more. That was quite interesting for us, that process of working with a scriptwriter to really make that relevant to our audiences.
That's an element of interactive side of museums that I'm just completely unaware of, because someone says museum interactive and I'm like, pressy button and some noises when you walk past a sensor, rather than creating words and creating actual interpretation that will sort of encourage an interaction from someone. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Although I do love a button. I'm the kind of person who becomes 5 again if there are buttons around.
One of the features in our museum is a jumping spider.
No, absolutely not. No, you lost me there.
So in our magician's workshop, it's so Showtown's all about getting the visitor to step into like a different pair of shoes. So in the Illuminations gallery, you get to become an Illuminations designer. Behind the scenes in the circus, you're like, learning about putting makeup on and becoming a clown, things like that. But then the magic, so the idea is that you're stepping behind the scenes of like a magic shop. So it's where all of the fun happens. It's where all of the tricks and the magic tricks and stuff are made and created. And we've got this workshop table in the center of the space that has things like a whoopee cushion in a fabulous looking, beautiful glass domed plush display with a few dials next to it, for example, and you can change the pitch or the fart type of a whoopee cushion.
Perfect.
Which, of course, it's love. But the reason that I'm coming onto this is we've got a button on one end of the table that shoots a spider up inside one of these glass cloche displays. A child or whoever on one side of the table wonders what this button does, and then someone on the other side has the bejesus scared out of them, of the spider that jumps up out of nowhere. But it gets hammered. Absolutely. Hammered. The kids are like dig 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 dig.
Of course.
Like, dig, 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 dig. So I have to regularly fix the spider.
Oh no, of course you do.
The spider just constantly breaks.
Sounds worth it to me.
Yeah, it's good fun.
So I was going to ask you, Jill, what interactives does your museum have? Those ones. Okay, that sounds amazing. Do you know, Phedra, where your museum will be in terms of that element of interaction in your museum when it opens? I know it's early days, so we're talking about museums at very different stages here.
I'm not told much about that. I'm very much in the preparing the objects for display. I overhear conversations here and there from museologists and archaeologists and stuff. I have seen in the past year I've been there that within the temporary exhibits area, they're using VR. They are encouraging modern artists to get inspired from ancient art and create their own art and displaying it together. There was an exhibit that ended a couple months ago where an artist visited the archaeological sites, the excavation sites where the objects displayed came from, and she painted those. So the interactive part of this exhibit was that those objects were shown in the background. You had a nice painting of the area as well. So you could imagine, the excavation sites and how it came to be into the museum. They did a interesting exhibit called 5, and it showed the lives of 5 different Cypriots across the centuries. So using noise and smells and hearing to try and reconstruct the lives of 5 Cypriots. Basically, osteoarchaeologists looked at their skeletons and realize, this person must have been a fisherman because they have this thing in their ear that only divers have. This person must have fallen from a tree because they came from this village that had olive production and their injury looks like they fell on their thumb, those kinds of things. And so the interactive part there was, for example, when you arrive to the person that falls from the tree, suddenly the floor kind of trembles.
God.
You can feel the person falling from the tree.
That's harrowing.
Sounds a little morbid, doesn't it? Yeah, or there was a story of a little girl that loved sugar because sugar production was a thing once upon a time in Cyprus. And so you can hear market noises. So somebody walking through a market and hearing, buy your foods here. And, those kinds of interactive things have happened in the past year. So I have high hopes for the new museum. One interactive thing is the conservators' labs will be on the ground floor and there will be a window.
Nice.
So people will be able to see conservators at work. So that's a nice interactive thing.
Big up the fishbowl. Yeah, I've got that in my museum. Big up the fishbowl conservators. We love it.
I'm like, is Kloe working today? No, she's not. She's always on a coffee break when I'm there.
Oh, am I? I had a visit visitor this yesterday pressing his face against the glass because the clean I was doing was really obvious. So, one wipe and it's completely different color, that kind of cleaning. And he was like gesticulating at me behind my back, like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? What's that magic sponge you're using?" Smoke sponge. I don't think I communicated it very well. Oh, both sets of interactive sounds really cool. The potential hopeful ones and the 2-month-old constantly breaking because they're so popular interactives. That sounds really cool.
There's some additional material to go with this episode if you would like even more of Jill and stories about Showtown, which you can find at our Patreon page. So if you support us on Patreon, you can become a patron for as little as $1 per month. Then you get bonus features like longer interviews, uncensored material, or in this case, more of Jill and Showtown. If you're interested and you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/thecword. While I've got your attention, I just want to say that Icon 24, there are still tickets on sale. The conference is in London this year, and we'll be there with merch. I'm really excited because I've just ordered all the stuff and it's going to be really cool. Anyway, we're going to be there with merch and opportunities to come and meet the team and talk to us and maybe give us some ideas for future episodes or vote on things, give us some thoughts. There's going to be loads of fun things. So you don't want to be missing that, aside from the fact that it's a fully packed program with, good conference stuff, mingling and receptions and all of that good stuff, right? But we'll be there too, and I hope that you will be as well. Tickets are still on sale, and you can go find them at Icon's webpage. Link in the show notes. See you there.
I am now joined by Matthew Turtle, who is the co-director at the Museum of Homelessness.
Hi, Phedra. Nice to be here.
So, Matthew, can you please tell me what exactly is the Museum of Homelessness?
Well, that's a good question. I think it always needs a bit of explaining the Museum of Homelessness, because I think the first thing to say is we're a bit like a hybrid museum in the sense that we were created only 10 years ago. So it's sort of been developed over time by a range of different people, right? It's been developed by people experiencing homelessness, by people who are campaigners and organisers. So it hasn't got that kind of traditional museum structure of a marketing officer or a curator. It's much more kind of flattened. It's not completely flat. So because of that, it was sort of like a hybrid museum, and we're very responsive to what's happening in terms of homelessness related issues. We carry out a lot of direct work, a lot of campaigning and activist work and support work. And then we also have that heritage side of it. We also have the education piece that a museum must have. So we were set up in the middle of the last decade on the onset of austerity politics and the advent of the hostile environment and Brexit. So I think our museum is very much in that kind of context and in response to that sort of thing. So that's what the Museum of Homelessness is. We do those two things, and we try and do it with a bit of a difference, I suppose, from what you might see from from a different kind of more traditional museum. So because we never had a building, right? We never had our own space to begin with. We were always going to other kinds of places. So we've set up Museum of Homelessness events and activities on the streets, in shelters, in hostels. We've done partnership projects. We've been in squats. And so, we've always kind of gone out. So the stakeholders are essential to the Museum of Homelessness. We don't really have an audience model. We're not really a tourist destination, or maybe that's going to change. And we always kind of gone out to the people, I suppose, and that's made quite an interesting journey, put it that way.
Can you tell me a bit more about what kind of events and activities you have had in the past?
So the museum is known for its collections-based work around kind of blending theatre-based methods with museum handling and museum display techniques. And so we call that object storytelling. So over the last few years, we've collected objects from around the UK. And they're not all from people who have prior experience of homelessness or who might even be currently homeless. It's from people who sometimes are in positions of power, or they're frontline workers, or they're organisers, people who have witnessing some aspect of homelessness. Might be homelessness injustice or excessive enforcement, or it might be something about their own experience of what helped them at a particular point in their life, and they share that story with the object. And so what we do with those objects and stories is we have them perform verbatim. So we don't have the traditional museum label and the plinth and the vitrine, and instead people really will come to a live experience. We've done 3 of those over the last several years we've been going. The first one was called State of the Nation, which was looking at homelessness and politics in 2017. Then we did one on the neuroscience behind dehumanized perception. So that's looking at bias and stigma. That was called Objectified. It was a big exhibition production. And then most recently was Secret Museum, which was looking at the pandemic, fake news and disinformation and what really happened during the pandemic to people affected by homelessness. So we use the objects to tell a story about homelessness. Actors perform them in the words of the person who's donated them. And it leads to really interesting discussions. So when you come to a Museum of Homelessness event, you will kind of have that live sort of experience of storytelling, of sharing, of discussion. Because homelessness is such an urgent issue for so many people, it suits a different kind of contemplation, I suppose. Perhaps one that's more active. So the Museum of Homelessness, obviously, after going nearly 10 years, is about to move into its own building. Well, we have moved into our own building, I should say. We've been here for about 6 months, but we've been developing it with the community here in Finsbury Park over the last 6 months. So rather than kind of having the kind of ribbon cutting ceremony for a glass extension that you might see, we've sort of reversed that process. And over the last 6 months, we've been sort of developing the space slowly. It's a really small space. It's in a park, Finsbury Park, which has a real radical history, as it was built in 1869. And it was a Victorian lung for people who were affected by poverty. And it was part of that kind of Victorian expansion, right? So I'm mentioning that because, you know, the park has a kind of tradition and history around supporting Londoners' poorer residents, you could say. So it suits us quite well. You know, the suffragettes used to rally here and things like that. So it's a lot of kind of activism around here, and 100 languages are spoken around Finsbury Park. So there's that kind of intersectionality and diversity of experience here, which really speaks to what we do as a museum. So when people come along, they will have that experience of the museum, that kind of, we're in our old park lodge. It's too small to be a traditional museum. So we're kind of using every inch of the grounds that we have, the small garden and the interior, to do this live storytelling. And we always kind of package that up into what we call a show. I've already mentioned a few of the names of the last shows: Secret Museum, Objectified. This one's called How to Survive the Apocalypse. So if people want to visit the museum and see our displays and experience what the museum's like, they can book for How to Survive the Apocalypse, which opens at the end of the month on the 24th of May. And people can come, and it's a 90-minute show where you'll really get a feel for what the museum is and what we do. And also hopefully learn something about what's happening right now, because this show, How to Survive the Apocalypse, is speaking to the multiple crises we're seeing across the social safety net in the UK and globally, really. And where is homelessness and all that? What part does displacement and homelessness play? And how does it feature? And we also believe a lot of the wisdoms and answers for this come from people who are marginalised, who are affected by some of these difficulties. We see that in our work. So we want to share some of that with the audience. And our model is that we have 50% of the week we're doing community stuff. I call it community stuff. And that's like work with people in the area, people who might be living in a hostel locally or even sleeping rough, or people who just need a supportive space. And then the other half of the week, we do the more typical traditional museum type of experiences, talks, events, workshops, and these 2 show days, How to Survive the Apocalypse on Fridays and Saturdays.
Did you define it as a museum 10 years ago when you only had a leaflet as well, or did the definition of museum come later on?
We wanted to create a museum of homelessness, but from the perspective of people who experience homelessness, and by involving, privileging lived experience of homelessness, because that authenticity around homelessness isn't really in written records, right? You go back into the workhouse histories or in poverty or even further, you know, who are keeping records? So this idea of a museum would address that balance. And then also it was about like physical stuff, you know, so the museum does have a paper-based archive and records. Homelessness is linked to welfare reform, it's linked to migration, it's linked to politics, and it's linked to the history of housing and municipal housing. And so, you know, you want to tell that story with these groups. Many of the big homelessness NGOs have their records in some of the bigger archiving institutions. So we see that kind of phenomenon of power being safeguarded, replicated there as well. But there's these small sort of fragmented groups of volunteers and organisations that kind of don't have their records kept. And we're privileged to have quite a large cross-section of those in our study as the Museum of Homelessness. So we use that as the kind of bedrock of the Museum of Homelessness when we were starting out. So it wasn't just that we wanted to kind of think about power and reshape power and rebalance representation, but it was also this kind of real, very, very clear need for an institution really to do that work. So that's also one of the reasons why we set it up in that way.
Are the archives available for research?
Oh, yeah, they are. We're not having visits at the moment just because we're setting up our new space. I'm sat in our new building right now. We've just had an archive room finished, so the shelves are all ready to go. We're transporting the archive over here soon, and then we can actually get it properly catalogued and listed. Keep an eye, for any listener, keep an eye on this space if you're interested in this history, because we will eventually this year, perhaps early next year, be able to finally make it fully accessible, which we've wanted to do for years now.
Could you talk a little bit more about the period of time where you had to move from space to space? As I understand, you were actually moving from different cities as well within the UK?
Yeah. We did do some work in other cities, and the reason for that is I think we want to be a national institution in the sense that we're the only museum of homelessness in the world, actually. So we kind of work. It's very important to us that we do work outside of London, and we've done the project Objectify, which was this show exploring dehumanised perception. That was at Manchester Art Gallery. We've done partnership projects with Glasgow Museum of Modern Art in 2017. So that's been part of the museum's journey. I think it's been a very, very important part. I think practically it's been difficult to sustain national working, but also to sustain working around London. I mean, I think the climate for setting up the museum, I think in those first few years, it was very much about kind of going project to project, it's laying the foundations, talking to people, getting people excited, doing one-off showcases at the Museum of Homelessness and building things up and laying planting a lot of seeds, basically. But it was about sort of 3 or 4 years after 2015, around just before the pandemic, really, where we made a kind of back, and we were quite intentional about trying to find some kind of environment to host us. We've never been sort of ambitious to find a large institution like an old Carnegie library, which might have 20 rooms in it, or a big warehouse building or something like that. We've never really wanted to do that because we've always had a mobile element to our work. But it was really hard, right? I mean, if you are trying to find a space in a city like London, good luck, because it's really difficult. We were we viewed these sort of mouldy old shop fronts and stuff around the city, which were trying to charge us sort of £50,000 a year.
Wow.
We would there were 2 occasions where we were kind of altruistically offered spaces by partners. One of them was a housing association, and these were kind of attached to housing developments. This is where a council will grant planning permission for a development so long as there's a kind of social benefit. Museums have tended to feel that. These weren't, to be fair, these were not luxury housing developers. We didn't have any conversations with those kinds of institutions, but it's still, it was an affordable housing development, and they were talking to us about giving us a space for 2 years. And we said no, and it was a horrible space. And, and I think that's the thing is it's difficult to find decent space. And we were, as you kind of grow and develop, you've got responsibilities, you've got, people are working for the museum, people are involved, you've got to find a space for people, you've got this archive and collection, which we've talked about, and where does that live? There are all these considerations. We just wanted a little space. And eventually, through kind of fortune, really, we were able to secure an initial conversation about making use of an old park lodge in Finsbury Park near Manor House Tube Station. They seldom make their way into the hands of community groups or small charities, really. It's just so many hurdles to jump through, and not all groups can. We were lucky that we were just able to wait for years. It took 3.5 years. And I think it's because we've been established for a few years, we were able to do that. But it's quite hard to sort of find that kind of space. So we were patient, and in the end we moved into this 2-story building, but it's been worth the wait, although it's been kind of torture at times, to be honest.
It always is.
And the grounds, we've got big garden space, which has been simultaneously beautiful and also a nightmare, because we, for example, decided to restore without really thinking about how difficult it was and how long it would take to restore a pond. And it's just been, for weeks and weeks, it was just this huge hole of mud. And I would be standing there looking at this massive crater, think, how am I going to welcome people to a museum when there's this huge crater? I don't know what I'm doing. How on earth do you restore a pond? But people help, we had advice and people helped us and we figured it out. And now it's just got to the point now where we've got it properly restored and people love it. So a lot of people helping to make it happen. And we're just a few weeks away from opening now and finally starting to feel like we've got a space we can share with the public. So yeah, it's been stressful, but it's also been a really amazing process.
Hi, Hi, this is Solange here. When we talked about doing an episode on new museums, I immediately knew where I wanted to go with that. Because in Sheffield, a new museum opened up only 2 years ago, and it was founded by somebody in their early 20s. James Hogg was 23, I believe, when the Yorkshire Natural History Museum had its opening day, and the queue went down the street. It was really exciting, and my daughter has loved going there with me, and I take her to a fossil club where they teach children about dinosaurs. It's brilliant, and I've done some work for them because they have an archive as well. So James was kind enough to agree to talk to me. I'm here with James Hogg, the chairman of the trustees of the Yorkshire Natural History Museum. This museum opened in 2022.
Yes, the 13th of August 2022.
Your background was in economics, I believe.
Yes, I don't come from any of the natural history backgrounds, so not from the earth or life sciences.
Yeah.
So what really interested me was the economic of institutions, particularly their growth. And for me, I had a huge obsession with museums throughout all my life, and I did have a general interest in natural history throughout most of my childhood and adolescence. So for me, the opportunity to open a museum for the public in Sheffield combined all my interests into one.
But I believe it started prior to all of this with a business called Neo-Jurassica.
So I set up Neo-Jurassica before the museum was established. The idea of Neo-Jurassica being to offer professional paleontological services in the UK. So kind of proving that there is a market out there for paleontology in the UK, because predominantly most jobs in the sector are in institutions such as museums and universities, and there isn't much scope outside of that for professional paleontologists.
So how did that then evolve into opening a museum?
Sure, so the museum's kind of a different ambition in general. The two organisations are separate.
Yeah.
There was, in my opinion, a lack of natural history museums in the north of England. Well, there wasn't any. So for myself, it was kind of, how do I bring that back to a community that doesn't have that facility? I mean, a lot of families locally struggle to afford to go down to London, spend the time to go visit the museum there. I mean, amazing, beautiful institution I absolutely love and adore. But a lot of families are struggling at this time, despite the fact it's free entry, to be able to justify the costs of travelling and be able to experience the education from that. And for me, it's facilitating that for families and individuals who are interested, that there's a place to come and visit and learn about these things, and also to research as well. So the collections are held for a research basis. So anybody can study them, they can look at the accessioned collection, and they can publish papers on that.
What's really struck me about this museum is that huge focus on access. Firstly, you're on the tram stop, and then the entrance fee is £4. So much cheaper than going to London. And
Absolutely.
I mean, even that can be a barrier to people just paying anything, but at least it's accessible in that way by public transport, because not everyone has a car. Then secondly, the feel of it is so different from somewhere like a big museum, National Museum. It's, it's one room pretty much, beautiful cupboards full of fossils and specimens and some standing displays. But the thing is, there's always somebody extremely knowledgeable in the room, and the child or the adult visitor can come with their questions. My daughter's come with very specific questions, and so she's been able to take the experience in the direction that she's interested in. It's a very personal experience, I find.
That's exactly what the museum's kind of been set up to do, is having that personal tailored experience. So you can come in, even if you're on a guided tour or not, there'll always be an expert in the room you can always ask questions to, learn more about the collection. You're not just staring at labels and the collection as a whole through the glass. You get to interact. You can bring specimens out, you can actually see them, you actually get up close. I think that's the important feature, really. It's about getting people engaged with the natural history of the world, really.
And there's always things out that you can touch. And when I brought my daughter to Fossil Club, that session was about Spinosaurus, and we got to hold a Spinosaurus tooth. And that was just kind of mind-blowing.
No, absolutely. It's all about that kind of engagement and getting people actually, especially children. I feel like if they actually get to hold a dinosaur's tooth or a dinosaur's bone, providing it's not too fragile, of course, it's incredible. So we have lots of that in our learning collection where they get to engage with that. I mean, that's again, the point really of hands-on. We do have Fossil Club to engage with the children, do fossil walks locally. We have public lectures which are free on entry with academics coming from all around the country. And we also have on site the public lab, which I'm very excited about, where people actually get to come in and learn the skills of fossil preparation. And I think that's such an experience that many museums don't offer, that true hands-on experience.
It's really nice to see an institution that's, trying its best to go as far as you can down that side of things.
Well, I think it's important to have that human connection. I think that's so vital to everything we do. And that extends just beyond, like, on-the-day visit as well. But just in general, the story of natural history specimens. For example, I'm mostly looking at fossils here. When the fossil collectors actually find something, there's a story of we tell their story in displays, and we have them associated in the displays labels and part of the guided experience. We embrace the human connection to all this as well, and the recent history of the specimen as well as its life previously.
So how did you kind of go about setting up the museum? What
That's
was
the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was a bit of a bizarre scenario. So the building was acquired previously already for labs for Neo-Jurassica. To get the kind of museum started, we noticed we only really needed downstairs for labs. We had this whole upstairs space, which was huge, and I mean, it was just a decision one day. I had a conversation with a guy, and we were just saying how it would be nice if there was a museum space in there. I just went, okay, let's do it. And that's kind of my attitude to anything. I was in my final year of university in my undergrad, so I rescheduled all of my classes to be on one day, all on a Monday, which was in London. So I used to commute to London, do everything on a Monday, do all my studies on a Monday, come back up, and then I spent 6 days a week renovating the building, acquiring the collection.
It's a real labour of love, actually, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I thought it was really important to do. I feel like if you don't do it yourself, then there's no point relying on anyone else. You've got to go out there, and if you think it's going to benefit the public, I think you should do it. I think that's the priority of what everyone should be doing. If they've got the justification to spend the time like that. I felt fortunate enough to do so I thought, let's go for it.
But you did mention that you might be moving to another premises at some point?
Yes, so there's a few things on that kind of front. So, I mean, the museum in general has plans for a larger expansion, which is very, very exciting, to make it so that it really is a museum of a national scale in the north. And then other exciting things as well. So we're just sorting out developing a brand new imaging lab, which is to open in 2 weeks, which is quite exciting. Brand new facility we've just acquired. There's all sorts going on in that respect. Brand new store facility as well for the collections, which I'm very excited about, and investing quite a bit in developing the equipment for that as well, making sure the humidity is controlled and temperature controlled. The system will actually notify us if anything is going wrong, whereas previously we had to manually monitor everything. The idea is to grow the museum with time, but in its current form, it's kind of nice to be kind of a test for what we want to do up north for a Natural History Museum. And then we do have exciting plans for the future, which are on a completely different scale.
Like Jurassic Park?
No, not quite Jurassic Park. No, but we're talking, we're talking realistically 30 to 40 times in scale. As
we were talking before about how it has this really kind of personal feel.
Keeping that personal touch, I think that's absolutely vital. For me, it's about that kind of experience factor. Especially, I mean, we're looking at the public exhibition area, so, I mean, I don't know how much I can reveal on this podcast, but I think I'll go for it and see if I get told off later. It's about having facilities in place, for example, with specialist areas where you can go in and it's kind of touring that. So one thing I'm trying to sort out, this may need to be scratched from the podcast, but if you're still hearing this, it's because I allowed it to be still in the podcast. For example...
you heard it here first.
I'm wanting to have a little ice age area where it's a cold room, cold frozen store essentially, where you go through, you have to put on jackets and feel like you're almost trenching in Antarctica, almost with like a big orange jacket on, and you go through kind of a system where it's freezing, and at the very end of it, we're sorting out and negotiating to have a mammoth at the end. So we're sorting out one that's in the full flesh.
Wow.
So you'll be able to actually go up and see a mammoth that's been preserved in the permafrost. That's just one of ideas. Other ideas include open storeroom, for example, glass cabinet storeroom where you go through and you can actually see the stuff in stores, and then there'll be like iPad or any tablet displays showcasing where you can click on and see what's in that cabinet, and you can kind of see the box it's in and be able to engage with, oh cool, that's what's been kept here. And if there's enough public interest, potentially having systems in place where you can kind of almost vote for things to go into display in temporary exhibition spaces.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Really allowing the public to decide what their museum is for them. But certain things have been secured that makes that, we know very confidently what we're planning to do.
Amazing. I mean, I guess a lot of it comes down to money.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the beauties of the museum is that we have the association with Neo Jurassica, and that revenue generated, any surplus is donated into the museum with gift aid, and really allows the museum to grow, so it doesn't have to rely on grants. The museum has never took a single public grant. It has been purely on its own self-surplus and self-funding that it's been able to grow, and it is self-sufficient. And I think that's one of the beauties of the museum. It is able to do all this engagement, be self-sufficient, and then if we do want a grant, it's purely for expansion of opportunities for the public rather than for pure maintenance, which I feel is a big problem facing a lot of museums at this moment in time. You've got some beautiful institutions around the country, but they are a struggle for self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
And when funds are running out, when times are tight like they are now, times are awful at the moment for many people around the country, financially.
Yeah.
We are going through a recession, and museums are hit by that as well.
Well, when you were mentioning this idea about the permafrost, I was thinking, that's going to use a lot of energy. And then that kind of prompted me to think back to a conversation we had when I was planning to rebind a book for you. And I said, well, what kind of leather do you want? And you said, no leather, because you're vegan.
Yes.
And that is I'm assuming that's a moral decision.
Absolutely, it's a moral choice.
And so I thought, that's really interesting, like that kind of ethic coming into the museum.
Well, that kind of
and I was
plays
wondering
in part
about the
with
energy.
the expansion as well. So the premises was a Victorian factory set so that when the sun comes on it, the windows were put in the direction for sunlight throughout the day, so they didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
There wasn't really that much of a budget for electricity or candles in the factory space. It had to be sunlight. So the building's roof is perfectly designed in slanted formations for solar panels to go on. I mean, that's a big thing of what I'm trying to do. I mean, the museum currently, the one we have now, the building at least we have now, is no gas. We really just rely on that kind of electric and trying to reduce it, the environmental impact. That's a big thing for me, myself.
Yeah.
And the future site will have that, and the future site we're looking at as well also has a side of it which is fantastic, which is the nature side of it. There is woodland included as well, which will allow us to engage with local natural history groups to encourage local ecological studies as well.
Brilliant.
And really be a safe space for animals in the city, we hope, as well.
Well, thank you. This has been so interesting. Thank you so much for taking part, James.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
A super quick correction to the interview that's coming up. Just to say that we talk about the new Cyprus Museum here, but actually it's going to be called the Cyprus Archaeological Museum. There you go, that's the correction. Enjoy the interview.
Hello again, everyone. This time I have with me Eleni Loizides, who is a conservator at the Department of Antiquities in Cyprus.
Hello, Phedra. It's great to be here with you, and thank you very much for the invitation.
So, Eleni, you are working on a project for the new Cyprus Archaeological Museum. So can you tell me, what will the new Cyprus Archaeological Museum be, and how will it differ from the current archaeological museum?
You're absolutely right. This project has been in the pipeline for many years, and it's finally materializing. So this is going to be a new museum, very different to the existing one, which was built at the turn of the previous century during the British rule in Cyprus. The new museum is a modern building, the result of an architectural competition which was launched in 2017. The competition was won by an architectural firm in Greece, XZA Architects, and construction of the museum started in early 2023. It's going to be a totally different museum to what we have today. A very large museum which will incorporate not only the exhibition spaces, estimated, I believe, at around 6,500 square meters of exhibition space, including temporary exhibits. But it will also include all the standard visitor facilities that you find in modern day museums, such as a cafeteria, a shop, a permanent exhibition space, educational areas for school children to come, and very importantly, from our point of view, new conservation laboratories.
Oh, we love that. So, as I understand, you have been involved with 3 different aspects of this project.
Mm-hmm.
Creation of the modern conservation labs, which you just mentioned, the setup of multiple storage rooms, and the management of the team of conservators who are preparing the objects for the permanent exhibits. Could you walk us through each of these roles?
Right. Of course, this is not a one-man job. It is a team of colleagues, including myself, who have worked on these 3 aspects of this museum that you have mentioned, and many, many more, because there's also exhibition spaces where us as conservators are involved, and various other issues that have to do with the day-to-day running of the museum. But in terms of the conservation laboratories, what my colleagues and I have done is basically for each of the laboratories, we have specified what the needs are in terms of equipment, in terms of furniture, based on our experience, based on what we project the needs will be in the future, and how many people we expect to be working in each laboratory. I should mention that we have laboratories for different areas of specialization in conservation. So we have metals conservation, we have ceramics and glass, organics, icons, wall paintings, and many more.
Beautiful.
So for each one of these laboratories, we have worked meticulously to set up the layout. Now, in terms of the storerooms, these are the storerooms where the existing collection of the Cyprus Museum will be moved to, but it is also the space where new finds from excavations from all over the island will be stored. We have designed the layout of the storerooms according to the methodology of storage that we consider to be most practical, that suits the needs of the department. And we have some storerooms that are specifically for material that requires different environmental parameters for their storage. So, for example, metals will be stored separately. Organic material will be stored in different conditions, in different rooms. Stone, again, will be stored in a separate space, whereas all ceramics will be in designated storerooms for ceramics. In order to determine the layout of these storerooms, we've had to specify the methodology by which we will be actually placing the items on the shelves. So decisions had to be taken as to how they will be packed and stored onto these shelves or within drawers. And this has been a collective decision in collaboration with archaeologists and the storeroom staff who have the task of managing, or who will have the task of managing the storerooms on a day-to-day basis.
Can you tell us a bit more about the team of conservators that you're currently managing in the conservation and preparation of objects that will be exhibited within the new museum, including myself?
Yes, as you very well know, Phedra, we have a huge task ahead of us to conserve and reconserve more than 6,500 exhibits, which will be included in the new museum. These range from your small flint tool to a large stone sculpture. So the range is huge. The range of size is huge. The range of materials is equally large. Therefore, good programming and prioritizing the work is important. We have been very lucky to be able to recruit 7 conservators as yourself to work on this project, and 3 more will hopefully be joining our team soon. So the work included is not just hands-on conservation, which is mostly of already conserved material, but it is will also be very soon looking at support for the objects, looking at packaging for the transport, and then hopefully will be the installation process in the new museum.
So you touched upon that earlier a little bit. Through the process, you have had to collaborate with many people from different professions, as you've mentioned, archaeologists and architects. So what I want to know is, how do you communicate the priorities that conservation professionals may have in the creation of the museum? And how have you had to compromise for certain things as well in order to appeal to their priorities as architects or archaeologists or any other profession?
I think good collaboration is key for success. The process of ensuring that conservation needs are met is just by registering them early on, as early as possible from before the architectural competition takes place. I think this is important because conservation issues touch on so many levels within a new museum, from environmental control to the design of the museums to the design of the storerooms. So as early as possible, registering the needs is important. Building such a huge museum, this is Cyprus's largest cultural project ever, is of course a challenge because there's so many parameters that go into it and there's so many professionals involved in the process. So compromises are often necessary, but there are of course some issues that are very, very not be compromised.
And to end this interview, I would like to ask you, when can our listeners buy their tickets to Cyprus and come visit the new museum?
Well, I would say not before 2028. Once the building of the museum is completed, the Department of Antiquities has been given 18 months to transfer the antiquities, the exhibits to the new museum and set up the exhibition space. So until that is done, there won't be any tickets being issued.
Well, it's okay. We still have the old one. It's a very beautiful building, neoclassical, and I'm waiting for all of you to come visit us.
Yes, we will be very happy to see some of your speakers here in the Cyprus Museum.
Today I'm reviewing Conservation Skills for the 21st Century, Judgment, Method and Decision Making by Chris Capel and Emily Williams. This is a 2023 Routledge publication. I picked this one up today because A, it's been on my shelf for about a year, not gonna lie, but also because new museums, new skills, they sort of matched in my head, right? So I thought, well, now's a good time. This is your typical Routledge intimidating looking book. It is black with stark white text and a fetching sort of stained glass motif on the front. So this is basically an update to the original Conservation Skills volume. I can't do a side-by-side comparison because I don't think I have that book. Actually, I'm pretty sure I don't have that book, but I did read it at some point as a student. And this is a book that's aimed at students and young conservators, emerging professionals. So I would argue that I'm sort of a mid-career to late-career person probably doesn't need to pick up this book. But if you're a younger professional or a conservation student, I do actually think it's a really neat book. So yeah, that's worth knowing about. Saying that, I'm mid-career at this point, and there were definitely a few things in here that I felt like, oh, I hadn't considered that, or oh, I'd forgotten if I'd ever learned that. So it served as a good refresher for me, even though loads of these things are fairly self-evident. I think of them every day, but you know, you gotta start somewhere. So it's not going to be self-evident to everyone. And I think everyone forgets different things as they age and grow supposedly wiser in the profession. So for me, it was actually a surprisingly good little refresher to look at this book. So I enjoyed it from that point of view. But I can definitely see how this is useful to a student. Initially, it struck me as a little bit Western focused, UK focused, but then I started reading the footnotes and I really appreciated that loads of them put cultural things into context, explaining things like Dickens' characters that might have been mentioned, or that different cultures might approach things differently. And so actually I really, really appreciated that. So I would say that that's definitely a point in its favor. So yes, this is a Western-centric book overall, and I would say geared towards a fairly UK audience initially, but can definitely be read by anyone. So to explain the sort of contents and layout of the book, it starts with reasons for preserving the past, the history of conservation, which I always enjoy a bit of history, conservation aims and ethics, what objects are and how you investigate and record them, and then it goes into concepts that we deal with quite a lot. So it has chapters on cleaning, on restoration, on stabilization, preventive conservation and storage, preserving the intangible, which I really enjoyed, perception, judgment and decision making, responsibilities, skills and sustainable practices in the 21st century. So that's really where I feel like this starts becoming the 21st century book that we were sort of promised by the title. I mean, it has up-to-date and thorough research throughout. Absolutely. This isn't a copy and paste of an original book with like 2 updates or something. This is a thorough reworking, and definitely it has, what was I going to call it? Contemporary references throughout. The bibliography is extensive and is, modern stuff, which is really good. It's been great to see. But I would say that chapter 11 might really be the one where I felt like the 21st century really came through in a new way. So we're talking about outreach, social media use, mental health. I really appreciated the section on mental health. That is so important. Climate change, diversity. So it's really talking about all the things that we on the podcast like really care about in that chapter. And it's not that it doesn't talk about them in the previous ones. It's just that that's the focus of that one. It talks about people-centered conservation and things like that. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. It's maybe not as heavy on them as I sort of want them to be, but that's because I'm quite radical. So I think this probably strikes a much better middle ground than I would. If I wrote this book, it would basically be like burn the old system and long live the people-centered conservation practices, which is probably taking a bit far. It's quite measured in how it does things, but it went into some of those things, and I thought that was really great. Other things I love about this book, it is in black and white, which is a bit of a shame. However, it has beautiful diagrams and figures and tables. Oh, they're just chef's kiss. I do love that sort of stuff, right? It's beautiful from that point of view. It has a lot of thorough case studies, so it's not just sort of endless text with like references. These concepts are also explored really thoroughly in loads and loads of case studies. And I think that's just really brilliant. But yeah, I'm sort of here for the sort of tricky concepts being conveyed in a visual way. I love that sort of thing. So there's a lot of like flow charts and cool diagrams and stuff like that. Some of these things like will genuinely help me convey these things better to clients. So it's not like this was a bad fit for someone who's mid-career. Like I said, it was a good refresher for me. I think this is a really brilliant book. I think it is basically essential reading if you're an early career professional and a student. It has some really important stuff in it, and it gives you a good grounding in all of these different concepts. I was actually going to say that if you are a non-conservator and you're trying to understand your conservation colleagues or loved ones, maybe a family member is a conservator, then maybe this is a good little book to glance at just to get an idea what they're talking about and some of the things that they might be wrestling with at work, some of the things that they keep mulling over. I think this would actually be a surprisingly good support book for people having a conservator in their lives and just trying to understand them a little bit better, because we can be tricky people. Yeah, definitely a good one for early careers people. And it has a total of, enjoy the page flipping, guys, 297 pages of glorious black and white goodness. However, I would say that it's well worth a read. So it's not a looker, but it is definitely a good, solid book with which gives you a lot of grounding in all these different concepts that conservators talk about on a daily basis. I remember being a student and feeling very overwhelmed by all of these different concepts of like retreatability and the agents of deterioration and about a billion other things as you were also trying to learn some chemistry. This is a good, helpful book for that. So hopefully that means that you can scoop this one up. I believe it costs around £30, probably a little bit more if you get it straight from the publisher. That's about standard for what one of these publications goes for. And it's probably just about sort of affordable for conservation students. And yeah, thank you to Chris and Emily for writing an updated version. Thanks for listening. We're the C Word, and you've been listening to Kloe, Phedra, and Jill today. join us next time for a road trip special. In the meantime, you can check out our website at theseaward.show, find us on social media, we're on pretty much everything, or email us at theseawardpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Music, used under Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. And as usual, this has been a Wooden Dice production.
Should we put a belly dancing track on and just...
Oh my God. Which one isn't copyrighted?
A half laugh.